We are simply not electrifying fast enough.
We need accountability for the way that fossil fuel subsidies are moving around the world.
There's no major technological hurdles on the road towards a total electrified heavy commercial transport system.
Welcome everybody to episode 6 of this very popular Dino Talks, where we are unpacking everything you need to know, well, as much as we can, about fossil fuel subsidies and the damage they cause to our climate, our economies, our people, and our shared future. Today we want to look at how fossil fuel subsidies penetrate and provide an unfair playing field in efforts to decarbonize transport, from land transport like trucks to perhaps shipping and aviation. The genesis for this 10-part series is a campaign launched just before COP26, that's the UN climate conference that took place in Glasgow last year, by We Don't Have Time's partner for this series, the UN Development Programme. It was launched by Frankie the Dinosaur, who walked into the UN General Assembly and warned leaders there not to choose extinction. Don't choose extinction. We Don't Have Time supported this campaign at the COP26 UN Climate Conference with a counter that was counting up the amount of money that governments were spending on fossil fuel subsidies since COP26 began, and we've kept that counter going, so you'll see it on today's show. The figures we're using come from the International Monetary Fund, who look at direct subsidies to fossil fuel companies and also to consumers that keep the price of fossil fuels artificially low. And they work out those direct subsidies at about 580 billion plus US dollars per year. But they also look at the indirect or externalities of fossil fuels subsidized fossil fuels and the damage they cause to our economies. Think air pollution, for example, or think climate impacts such as droughts and floods. Either way you look at it, it's a huge amount of money that could perhaps be better spent on dealing with environmental challenges like climate change and also dealing with issues like poverty and improving livelihoods. And overall, of course, it makes little sense, does it, that governments are trying to decarbonize the world to spare us all from dangerous climate change, whereas round the corner, perhaps another ministry in that same government is looking to increase fossil fuel production and subsidize fossil fuels. This show is brought to you by We Don't Have Time and UNDP, and it's supported by Prime Computer, which is a supporter and a partner with We Don't Have Time. I'd like to ask the audience right now to download our app, which you can find at wedon'thavetime.org, and there you can then post some questions to the guests on our show and also interact with the We Don't Have Time family, which is about 65,000 organizations and entities and individuals, generating about 65 million in social engagement per month.
You okay? You need a minute? Cool. Okay. Listen up, people. I know a thing or two about extinction. And let me tell you, and you'd kind of think this would be obvious, going extinct is a bad thing. And driving yourselves extinct? In 70 million years, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. At least we had an asteroid. What's your excuse? You're headed for a climate disaster, and yet every year governments spend hundreds of billions of public funds on fossil fuel subsidies. Imagine if we had spent hundreds of billions per year subsidizing giant meteors. That's what you're doing right now. Think of all the other things you could do with that money. Around the world, people are living in poverty. Don't you think helping them would make more sense than, I don't know, paying for the demise of your entire species? Let me be real for a second. You've got a huge opportunity right now. As you rebuild your economies and bounce back from this pandemic, this is humanity's big chance. So here's my wild idea. Don't choose extinction. Save your species before it's too late. It's time for you humans to stop making excuses and start making changes. Thank you.
Today with me, I also have my co-host, Cassie Flynn from UNDP, and we want to see, as mentioned, how fossil fuels and subsidized fossil fuels get into our transportation systems. Remembering too, that when it comes to aviation and shipping, it's even more an Alice in Wonderland scenario, given that these two tech sectors tend to enjoy tax-free fuels in the first place. Let me introduce our first guest, Andreas Follér, who is head of sustainability at Scania, one of the world's biggest manufacturers of trucks, buses and engines, with a commitment to electrify and a strong decarbonization targets. And they do that including with our partners, the Exponential Roadmap. Andreas has over 20 years experience in forging sustainability, working in various sectors, including energy and textiles and the automotive sector, as well as working on climate change for the NGO WWF. Andreas, you have the floor.
Thank you, Nick. Great to be here. As you know, transport is changing rapidly. Mega trends such as urbanization, digitalization is really changing our industry fast. We also have some technological disruptions such as connectivity, automatization, and of course, electrification that hits us now simultaneously. This means in total that we will change more the next 10 years than probably we have done in the last 100 years. And in Scania, we embrace this totally. We believe that this is for good. The future of transport needs to be both decarbonized, clean, and increasingly digital and connected. We were the first company in our industry to set science-based carbon reduction targets. And these targets are guiding our decisions in all levels of the company. And they are very aligned also with our technological roadmaps. Today, we invest more money in zero-emission vehicles such as battery electric and fuel cells than we do in combustion engines. We have more people working with software engineering than we have in hardware engineering. And we serial produce battery electric vehicles today, both fully electric and plug-in hybrids. And this is just the beginning. The early adopters, our customers, they love these products. They're more energy efficient, and the energy is cheaper per kilowatt hour. Electricity is superior to diesel. So that's great for the economy. They're more silent, less vibration, which is great for the working conditions for the drivers, and less carbon, which is great for everyone. I would like to stick my chin out and say that there is no major technological hurdles on the road towards a total electrified heavy commercial transport systems. Already by 2025, all our applications will be available in an electrified version. And by 2030, we target a 50% of our volumes being battery electric or fuel cell electric. Focus now need to be on the adoption curve. We need to make this work for our customers, and the only way our customers is going to make this shift if it's make economical sense to them. And there's two things I want to stress here. First thing is charging infrastructure, of course. Great vehicles are crucial, but we need to be able to charge them. We need to take down the operational thresholds for our customers. And this is not a chicken or egg problem. We just need to get going now. We are very transparent with our roadmaps, with our ramp up of these solutions, but we need the charging infrastructure. Right now and for a long time, depot charging, destination charging will do the trick, but sooner rather than later, we need high capacity charging points along the major routes around the world. We are ourselves investing into this with a joint venture together with Volvo and Daimler, aiming to set up 1,700 high-capacity green electricity charging points in Europe. But this will not be enough. A lot of investments are needed in the charging infrastructure, in the grid, and in renewable electricity to make this come true. But let me now turn to regulation, because this is crucial. And by the way, the charging infrastructure build-out will be regulated in the EU by the Alternative Fuel Infrastructure Regulation, AFIR. And this one is very crucial to get it going. It will be on national governments to implement it, but this one is very important and we need to accelerate this. But the other one, and that brings me close to today's topics, is the emission trading system 2, which also includes then transport and buildings. At Scania, we are 100% in favor of this emission trading system. Without it, it will be difficult to get the adoption, to accelerate the shift. We need to have a price on carbon. We need to make sure that it's economical, feasible, and logical for our customers to turn from diesel to electric. And an emission trading system will make the difference here. I would also like to stress that the revenues from such a system would be good if they go back into the transport system to accelerate the adoption further by investments in, for instance, charging infrastructure. So a coherent, effective carbon price mechanism is the right thing to do at this point. And this is one way, of course, to make sense for our customers. In France, Germany, the Netherlands, we're already seeing governments subsidizing up to 80% of the added cost on an electric vehicle compared to a diesel-powered vehicle. We're seeing in the road tolls in Germany is being waived for electric vehicles. In Sweden, you can get up to 100% tax rebate if you invest in charging infrastructure for a commercial vehicle fleet. This is all great news. So this is what we need to keep up with if we want to see a decarbonized heavy commercial transport system in Europe and around the world. Thank you.
Thank you. And maybe this is good news that there is some subsidies to actually, in offense, positive subsidies to get into the electrification of heavy goods vehicles, which is great. But there is another story behind this, which is another subsidy that we also need to address in this show, which kind of works in the opposite way, right? Maybe against a price on carbon. And that's we'll come to that in the debate. Assaad, Razzouk is the Chief Executive Officer of Gurīn Energy, which is providing renewable energy and clean energy storage solutions across Asia. Assaad is also a podcaster and a commentator based in Singapore. His podcast, The Angry Clean Energy Guy, is ranked in one of the top 2% most popular shows out of 2.7 million podcasts globally. And that's ranked by something called Listen Score. He's also got more degrees than I've had hot dinners. He's a graduate of Syracuse University. He's got an MBA from Columbia and a Doctor of Philosophy. That's from maybe the University of New York, and then an honoris causa, which I never heard of before. You maybe explain what that is. I don't know if that's subsidized by fossil fuels. I doubt it. In climate change, sustainable development and international cooperation from Terry University in India. So, Assaad, we're going to give you the floor to give us your perspective on this issue of transportation, decarbonisation, and the murky world of fossil fuel subsidies.
Thank you, Nick. Wonderful to be here. Look, let me start by saying that let's start from the big picture. If you cut the fossil fuel subsidies that you mentioned, you would single-handedly cut emissions by 36%. That's not me saying it, that's the International Energy Agency. And you would also single-handedly cut at least 2.2 million deaths per year out of the 5 million that are caused by burning coal, oil, and gas. So fossil fuel subsidies are not some conceptual framework. They actually kill people. And I don't think this point is made often enough. And so, with that framing, perhaps, let me talk maybe for a couple of minutes about aviation and shipping, because what's going on in aviation and shipping is frankly scandalous. So first, aviation. Governments today subsidize the pollution from flying, as I think you referred to very briefly at the beginning, because jet fuel is scandalously exempted from taxation and has been for decades, right? So they're actually paying positive money effectively as a subsidy to the airline industry to fly some more. And then the regulators ignore that when they talk about aviation, the aviation industry as a whole. Now, I just want to then look at the impact of these subsidies. What these subsidies that the airlines and the aircraft manufacturers and the oil and gas and coal companies get mean is that they have not been incentivized to move to electric flight, right? So we've probably lost 40, that's 40 years of advances in terms of electric flying because of the impact of these subsidies. Because the subsidies, are kind of have a two-level impact. The first impact is they encourage people to use fossil fuel modes of transport. So we're talking about airplanes at the moment. But the second impact is they put money in the pocket of fossil fuel producers who then lobby and obfuscate. And that's not some small number. So just five oil companies spend $200 million per year on, effectively what I think a reasonable person should call propaganda. And what that 200 million does is it obfuscates the debate. It changes the goalpost. It pushes back efforts to electrify electric transport. And, even though we've all known what the impact of fossil fuels is, and the fossil fuels that you referred to previously, and this is the bit that's really crazy, are actually expected by the IMF to go up next year, not down. So up from 6 trillion. Now, I think we have to keep that in mind. And then the other, crazy thing about aviation and shipping in particular is that these two global industries, on which a lot of logistics and trade depends, are regulated by United Nations bodies who with no teeth. So you have kind of the perfect environment for industries to do nothing because their regulators have no teeth. So on the airline side, you've got the International Civil Aviation Organization. And on the shipping side, you've got the International Maritime Organization. And these two have an appalling track record of doing absolutely as little as possible to police any of the pollution from their industries. What that meant is that we've lost 40 years of potential innovation in flight technology, in battery research, and in hydrogen innovation that are applicable to these industries because of all this obfuscation and the weak regulatory framework. And this is only changing now. So if you look at this year, 2022, finally we're starting to see movement on electrification. There's about 100 different electric plane projects around the world. But they're going to need a few years to deliver the goods. And during those years, you can bet that as long as the fossil fuel subsidies are taking place, the obfuscation and the delaying tactics will also be taking place. So the problem with fossil fuel subsidies is kind of pernicious, and it's everywhere. And just to touch on shipping, because I don't want to forget that before I close. Shipping is, without exaggeration, the least regulated sector in the world in terms of emissions and pollution. Right? Shipping pollution is something that people don't think about often because the ships are out of sight in the middle of the open oceans, and there nobody's really watching what they do. But it's actually documented what they do, right? And what they do is they pollute. So one, they use the dirtiest possible fuel, bunker fuel, to power their ships in the open ocean. Now that bunker fuel is the waste product of the refining process, which, by the way, is a hidden subsidy to the oil and gas industry, because if they weren't using it, the oil and gas industry would have to dispose of it safely, which would cost them hundreds of billions. And then second, that bunker fuel is about 100 times worse than diesel, right? I mean, you're talking some serious pollution impact. So that's just the start, because after that, they also dump their water, their wastewater, into the oceans. They fill up the ocean with plastic as well. And again, as I said, nobody's watching because it's the open oceans. They dump their excess oil, and they are not actually required to treat their wastewater with anything robust. And the International Marine Organization has made sure of that. So the regulations are kind of super weak. And then when they get to port, more than 3/4 of them will tell you that, sorry, they can't plug the boat into the electric infrastructure of the port because they don't have the infrastructure that would stop that diesel engine polluting, or that the port doesn't have the infrastructure, all of which makes a direct health impact on respiratory, on diseases, at people who live within about 200 kilometers of the shipping berth, because that diesel releases sulfur dioxide, which basically poisons you. And, to be honest, I can keep going and going because the shipping industry does not want to set a net zero target by 2050. It's the only one resisting it, and etc. But why don't I pause?
No, that's great, Assaad. I mean, that's a very honest perspective of aviation and shipping. Let me bring in Cassie here, who is my wonderful co-host. She's UNDP, the UN Development Programme Strategic Advisor on Climate Change and head of the Climate Promise. She's an internationally recognized expert on global treaty negotiations and climate change. She provides advice to countries on how to develop and fulfill their pledges under the Paris Climate Agreement. And she was the 13th most influential person on climate change in 2017, according to Analytica. So that's really something. Cassie, difficult for you in the UN to directly respond, in a sense, to Assaad's comments on the International Maritime Organization, or ICAO, with aviation. But maybe you could just give us a little commentary on what you've heard from our two amazing guests.
Thank you so much, Nick. And it's such a pleasure to be here with you and the whole We Don't Have Time team. Andreas, Assaad, I appreciate so much your comments in this, because I think there's a few things that really struck me. And this is this multi-level system that we have now, where we have all of these discussions on sort of policy, whether at the global, national, subnational levels. And then we have a lot of what you have talked about today, which is what's happening on the ground. What does it look like when a boat is in the open ocean? What does it look like as we're trying to increase adoption of things like electric vehicles and the infrastructure that has to come in place to be able to enable this increased level of adoption? And I think our struggle collectively now is how do we build these bridges? Because even though we know, and we hear this a lot in the climate world, we know how to solve this problem. We know the technology that we need. We know the policies that we need. The carbon pricing, Andreas, that you spoke about, some of the accountability issues, Andreas or Assaad, excuse me, that you spoke about. I think that this is how we go about doing this, and the conversations that we have to have really demonstrate that we need this political will. We need decision makers, heads of state, CEOs at the table being able to talk about how we make these bridges. And also, and I think this speaks to a lot of the points that you made, we also need accountability. We need accountability for the way that fossil fuel subsidies are moving around the world. We need accountability for the damage that they are causing. Assaad, you mentioned some of the environmental, the jobs, the social impacts of this. It's crazy that we've set back innovation by 40 years, and we've set back the ability to fly in clean planes by 40 years. This is just something that doesn't make sense. And so how do we start to right this ship, so to speak, excuse the pun, but how we start to put in place these policies and these politics, being able to address who's making these decisions and how they're making them, will be something that I think we collectively have to do immediately, and also at a scale that we haven't quite seen yet before. So really appreciate all of your comments and looking forward to the discussions. Nick, back over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Let's have a little bit chat about this. And I just before we, I think I'll just start with the first question. But before I do with that, I think we also have to remember something that really hasn't come out of this too clearly, which is there is also something called climate change. And actually, if we let that rip, if we really let climate change get out of hand, the kind of costs we will be facing as a global society, both the ones that we can actually cost and the ones that we can't cost, is going to be potentially huge, because it's a poverty of imagination not to understand what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change actually is telling us. And we have 3 years to peak our emissions, less than 10 years to halve them globally, to stand a 50-50 chance of staying at 1.5 degrees centigrade. So, this is also part of the story. So when the fossil fuel subsidies, we talk about them, we can talk about many, many aspects of them, how they penetrate our society, but also behind it as well is this harsh reality that we have to confront, that they are putting us into fast forward to a very miserable future for every man, woman and child. And this cannot be allowed to happen. Now, Andreas, let me come to you a second, because it's amazing that Scania can be doing this. It's great to see support in Europe for this. Of course, European countries also provide fossil fuel subsidies as well. My country, the UK, Germany, others too. So that's also there in the playground, as it were, as a bit of a bully around the swings. But what about, Scania is not just in Europe, right? You're also in Latin America. And so what does it mean if you're trying to electrify heavy trucks and buses in other countries when there might be a big fat fossil fuel subsidy, right, staring that potential customer in the face? Doesn't it make it difficult, or does it not make it difficult? Yeah.
No, it will slow down the adoption rate, certainly. I mean, in heavy commercial transport, remember that the transport operators are running a low margin business. What is important for these companies, these operators, is the total cost of operation when it comes to their vehicles, their fleet of vehicles. And energy is number one cost driver. So anything that, as you said before, Nick, counterbalance the incentives to shift will be detrimental to the pace of the shift, most definitely. So what we're seeing is that we will probably be a little bit ahead of the curve in Europe, even a little bit ahead of the curve compared to the US. And then Latin America, Asia, and Africa will follow suit. And it doesn't need to be so many years of lagging. I think the crucial thing here is the infrastructure and the electrical grid, how that will manage in different countries around the world. But you're 100% correct in saying that we will see a delay with subsidies on diesel, most definitely.
Okay. Just before I come to Cassie, because I know she's got some questions, Assaad, just thinking that you also run a renewable energy company in Asia, right? And knowing that renewable energy is at the heart of this, I mean, it's amazing that it only gets about 200 billion in positive subsidies around the world. And of course, that's even going down as well as it becomes so competitive versus the fossil fuel subsidies, which seem to be with us forever. What is the infrastructure for the electrification of transportation in all its shapes and forms now unfolding in Asia from your perspective and from where you're sitting as a renewable energy company as well?
Look, I love wedon'thavetime.org because it says it all in those words. We don't have time, actually. 1.5 degrees, has been banked. And I also love the fact that the UN Secretary General has also become an angry clean energy guy. I mean, just read his tweets on the topic, right? They are, let's say, blunt and direct. And what this means, just to bring it back to your question, is we are simply not electrifying fast enough, and we are not deploying renewable energy fast enough. And we don't need any subsidies, nor frankly do we get any. I mean, I can't think of a market today in Asia where we actually get, what you might refer to as subsidies. So, they're not subsidies, right? It's the other guys who get the subsidies, and that really has to stop. And all this government stuff, it's not doing it. And the corporates, by the way, are not doing it either. They're all, so everybody's moving slowly, right? And, it is a real, it then leads to helplessness. So a lot of people around the world think about the climate change as a challenge, don't feel they can do anything about it, and they just get depressed or they don't do anything. And what we actually need is we're going to need some massive direct citizen climate action movements, to make it happen, because it's otherwise, we're on a straight path to 2 degrees plus, probably 3 degrees in our lifetime.
Okay, Cassie, maybe you've got a couple of questions here, yeah?
Yeah, just to build on that, I'm also in the back of my mind, also thinking about just sort of the current geopolitical situation in terms of what's happening with Ukraine. And we've seen, of course, that this devastation that has happened with the war in Ukraine. But this has also led to a conversation because of the impacts on oil prices. And we've seen the prices of a barrel of oil go over $100, and we've seen sort of this ignite this, I think, this tension a bit about what are the short-term solutions in order to meet the immense energy demand that we have in the world, but without, and Andreas, you mentioned this a bit about locking in an infrastructure that might lead to another situation where we have 30, 40 more years of infrastructure for fossil fuels. And I would love to hear what you both think about this right now. I mean, is this the time where we can truly get off of fossil fuel subsidies, or do we need other steps, other bridges, other small steps to get there? I would be so keen to hear on what you both have to say about this.
So, Andreas, let me ask you a question here, because we've had this shock in the world. The shock is the Ukraine war, and the shock is obviously the shock for the people of the Ukraine. But there's also been a shock to the oil price as well, the fossil fuel price, and of course we've seen a barrel of oil jumping over like $100 a barrel. And for many people looking at this, especially I would think in the sector that you're talking about, right, which is heavy trucks, where the margins are so tight and the cost of fuel is so much, this would be probably politically difficult for any politician to turn around to the logistics industry and say, well, actually, we're going to get rid of the fossil fuel subsidy as well, because then that price would actually go even further. And yet at the same time, of course, if they were all electrified transportation right now, they'd be laughing, right? Because they would be getting renewable energy, wind and solar power, putting the electricity into the grid, and the oil price would be irrelevant in a sense. Yeah. So there's this kind of bit of a chicken and egg situation here right now. What's your take on this?
No, it's a paradox. It's just what you say, that this terrible war will probably in the long term makes us all want to go even faster towards a situation where we're not dependent on fossils. But short term, it's very difficult for politicians to do anything else than actually increase the subsidies. And the reason is that we are not there yet. We're, as I said, we're in the beginning of an S-curve, and our customers, businesses, will go out of business if they can't cope with this shock. And I think this goes for all countries, that unfortunately energy prices, fossil prices, that is the dominant base of our energy system still, it's just we can't cope with price shocks there. It will hit the most vulnerable groups in the society. So I do understand the situation for the politicians. I just wish we had some more long-term planning. I wish we started earlier, and I wish that now, when we're in this, we're able to look at this soberly and see that we have to accelerate, and we need to have a long-term plan that includes the knowledge that it will keep be volatile. We will keep getting these shocks, but we still need to go towards phasing up the fossil subsidies and incentivize renewable energy and renewable electricity, of course, for our sector.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Assaad, I would be really keen to hear your thoughts on this as well.
Okay. On the encouraging side, Germany did move to say we're going to be 100% renewable by 2035. Right, that is a huge move in terms of where Germany was, and now it's about delivering that goal. On the negative side, the crisis is being taken advantage of by the same fossil fuel subsidy beneficiaries that we're talking about to actually embed fossil fuel infrastructure at a much larger scale. So Germany is ordering floating LNG terminals. So is France. So is Italy. Greece is building an LNG terminal, and the American LNG companies are salivating and now approving projects that have stalled because they see an export market in Europe. And what is kind of missing from that picture is any sort of carriage to tell people that, look, you need to sacrifice just a tiny little bit, but you need to sacrifice something, because the trade-off here is, going back to my favorite brand, is that we don't have time. And these assets are actually going to deliver a higher certainty of runaway climate change. So conversations are, kind of nice, but the facts on the ground, these LNG floating terminals orders by all these rich countries, are facts on the ground. They're going to be with us for many years to come.
Mm-hmm. I think we might have to, I think we're now running a little bit out of time. I think we're getting to the end of what has been an amazing show. Cassie, do you want to ask Assaad one last question? And then I'll ask Andreas one last question.
Great. Thanks, Nick. Assaad, just sort of building on what you were talking about, I keep thinking about innovation. And I keep thinking about, how do we, if we have countries that are going all in on these LNG terminal, the floating LNG terminals, and we've got, sort of these technologies, what is the other side of that coin? How can we start to pursue innovation and pursue this alternative reality, right? The reality where we do achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this. And you've talked a lot about shipping, you talked a lot about aviation, and thinking about, well, if we get the prices right, is that enough to lead to innovation? Or are there other things that we need too? So Assaad, over to you.
Thanks, Casey. Yeah, look, I've got a particular allergy to technology and innovation in this context, because we don't need any new technology to speak of. I mean, we have 95% of what we need, and we certainly don't need to innovate about anything, right? It's all kind of right there, but we're just not doing it. Every penny that's going to an LNG terminal is a penny being displaced from a faster electrification, right? So it's kind of, the problem is almost elsewhere. The problem is you have a massive amount of fossil fuel subsidies that have put a lot of money over decades in the wrong pockets, that have then shifted the debate and created all these vested interests at a global scale, none of whom are incentivized to do anything about the problem, because all of them are there for the short term. So a political mandate is short term, a CEO mandate is short term, and you've got this thing where actually nobody's thinking about the long term, and everybody's acting to about the distance of their nose.
Maybe we need Pinocchio. He's had a longer nose, so yeah. Well, no, we don't need Pinocchio. It's rather the other direction, yeah. Okay, so Andreas, thank you. Let me give you the last question, because so it's amazing that a heavy truck company and a bus company has actually set themselves a science-based target, right? And I know that you're pretty well policed by the Science Based Targets Initiative, and also by our friends at the Exponential Roadmap, who are all part of this, and in with the UN Race to Zero and all this. So everyone's watching what you're doing, and we applaud you for that. How is it going? You mentioned some numbers for, I think, the mid-2020s. Will you be able to halve your emissions by 2030, do you think? And are they operational emissions and supply chain? Or, I mean, just tell us how the journey's going. We're not trying to hold you accountable here. We're just curious.
No, as I said, the technology is here, so we're very optimistic. And if we're hitting our sales targets, that 50% of our volumes should be zero-emission vehicles, we will be able to get at least close to halving our emissions, because our user phase emissions in Scope 3, Category 11, makes up 96% of our total emissions. So supply chain is also important, operations is also important, but they are limited compared to our when our trucks and buses are being used. So I think my key message is that the technology is here. We can do this, but then we have to make sure that it make economical sense for our customers. And then we have to integrate a price on carbon in everything, in emission trading system, in taxes, in road tolls. So it makes sense to make the shift and then phase out the fossil subsidies, maybe with targeted support to vulnerable groups, but just get that done, and then I think we're in long term for a good trajectory towards zero.
Good. So congratulations to everybody involved in renewable energy and electrification of trucks, because despite the fossil fuel subsidies, some people actually are just moving forward and kicking carbon out of the atmosphere. So well done. Thank you, Assaad. Thank you, Andreas. Thank you, Cassie, my wonderful co-host. And thank you to you, the viewers, for being on this episode of the Dino Talks. Bye.
We believe by rewarding climate solutions and warning all the polluters, we will make it profitable to save our planet and super expensive to destroy it.
We must now zoom in on the quality and the implementation of plans, on measuring and analyzing, on reporting, transparency and accountability.
We want to be better, and that's why we are open for climate dialogue.
We want to know what you think, and so that we can improve.
Let's give climate love to those that have the solutions. And let's send climate warning to those that needs to change.
I invested in We Don't Have Time because I actually agree, we don't have time.
We're trying to reduce CO2 collectively.
If we don't act urgently and quickly, catching up later won't work.
The drive to net zero is the growth story of the 21st century.
We had about $350 billion of direct subsidies and tax expenditures, tax breaks given to fossil fuels.
Have such an enormous mobilization of business, finance, civil society, and science all gathered here.
We have halved our own emissions between 2012 and 2017 and are now at a 70% reduction.
SSAB has decided to be the first steel company in the world to offer fossil-free steel to the market in just a few years.
There's lack of clarity and it just feeds greenwashing and delays meaningful action.
We just have to go quickly. We have the technology. We don't have to develop technology.
We're going to create this huge wealth transfer from energy producers who represent a tiny minority of people to energy consumers who represent all people.
We are in a climate emergency and we are very far from where we need to be.
Get ahead of the curve or you're going to lose.
I was able to attend one demonstration that kicked off at Kelvin Grove all the way to George Square, and we had a lot of activists.
What I feel that I can bring is a young audience that maybe doesn't know what to think about climate change.
What is happening here, negotiating, it's so wrong from our perspective. You don't put a price on your mother.
Now, personally, I don't believe the fossil fuel industry should continue to be allowed to operate the way it's been operating for the last several decades.
We want to bring a voice to all the new solutions, the new ideas, the new entrepreneurs who are out there trying to kind of make a break and create this new climate economy.
They're setting a great example, and there's lots of other big businesses that should follow their example.
I really want to urge everybody just to be thinking more about land use and not just electrifying vehicles to, maintain the environment that got us here today.
They want to ban the word burgers, sausages, and steaks from being used on vegan and vegetarian products.
Tell them what they do so that they will be encouraged to do more. And together with the community or users, we share this to millions of people on social media, so this is getting noticed.
Let's bring in Shweta Chakrabarty tonight, risk and behavioral scientist and president of U.S. operations for We Don't Have Time.
As the name says, we don't have time.
ستوكهولم مؤسس منظمة ليس لدينا الوقت. We don't have time. السيد إنغمار رونسبورغ.
Joining us for more as We Don't Have Time's Nick Nuttall. Nick, welcome to the program.
And Nick, about this counter, speaking of numbers.
This is a clock that shows you how much money has been spent on fossil fuel subsidies since the beginning of the COP.
We have a climate crisis and we're still subsidizing the industry which is causing the crisis. I mean, it's completely dumb. I'm a finance guy, it makes no sense whatsoever.
$2.5 trillion went into subsidies for fossil fuel. That's a definition of insanity.
Still, this is a positive. It's the first COP decision that actually mentions coal power or fossil fuel subsidies.
We need to communicate climate action. Because if only a few people or a few companies are doing climate action without communicating it to others, we will not solve the climate crisis.